these six lenses all operate on a little bit of a different time cycle over a different duration. But I really tried to pull together what I think are the dominant views of how we can look at Bitcoin. Because one of the things that needs to be true for Bitcoin price to come up is capital needs to flow into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think there's a couple things that are really fundamental to that. One, we have to show that Bitcoin has utility. And I think the ecosystem and the companies that are building are continuing to do that from a security perspective, from a store of value, from a means of exchange. That is all moving forward. But
As Bitcoin experiences one of the most volatile and challenging periods in its recent history, investors are increasingly debating whether the current market turbulence reflects a temporary macroeconomic headwind or a fundamental shift in the cryptocurrency's long-term trajectory. Speaker reveals that Bitcoin's recent price volatility has become the central focus of discussions across the cryptocurrency industry, even as the asset's fundamental value proposition remains largely unchanged. Following Bitcoin's decline below the $60,000 level, investor uncertainty and market anxiety have intensified, prompting renewed debate about the current market cycle. According to the speaker, this cycle has been particularly challenging, marked by 3 consecutive quarters of significant declines, including major corrections during the fourth quarter of 2025 and the first 2 quarters of 2026. Unlike previous 4-year Bitcoin cycles that feature dramatic upward price movements before major corrections, the current cycle has produced more modest gains followed by relatively larger declines. The speaker attributes this unusual performance primarily to broader macroeconomic conditions and shifting global capital flows rather than any weakening of Bitcoin's underlying fundamentals. Speaker further reveals that although Bitcoin remains more volatile than traditional financial assets, its long-term volatility trend has been gradually declining as the market matures. He argues that Bitcoin should be viewed less as a short-term inflation hedge and more as a long-term protection against currency debasement. Additionally, he explains that Bitcoin's market structure, which is heavily influenced by leveraged perpetual futures contracts and automated liquidations, continues to amplify short-term price swings. Despite these fluctuations, the speaker emphasizes that Bitcoin's utility as a secure store of value and a decentralized peer-to-peer network remains intact, representing a source of long-term economic value that investors often overlook during periods of market stress. As Bitcoin continues to navigate market uncertainty, the debate over its long-term value is far from over. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more in-depth crypto market insights.
we broke through sort of 60,000 this week, and it just seems like there's more questions that come up despite the fundamentals still being unchanged.
Feels like we are in that part of the cycle or whatever season, if you want to call it, where everyone is called.
I think everybody's circling around just the uncertainty and the anxiety around it. I don't know how much more of a shake is needed. I feel like in this cycle, like we've had 3 brutal quarters. We've had big drops in Q4 of 2025, big drops in Q1, and now big drops in Q2. And so it's been an extended period of time that has been a bit out of cycle for Bitcoin as a whole. And as you said, we didn't have the run up as an order of magnitude that has been in line with previous 4-year cycles, but we've had sort of a lower tick up and a larger drop down from a relative basis. There's an element for me that it is more of a macro global economic challenge right now in terms of where the capital's flowing and what are the vehicles for people to invest in. Because one of the things that needs to be true for Bitcoin price to come up is capital needs to flow into the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think there's a couple things that are really fundamental to that. One, we have to show that Bitcoin has utility. And I think the ecosystem and the companies that are building are continuing to do that from a security perspective, from a store of value, from a means of exchange. That is all moving forward. But when we see stuff around Stretch, Strategies product and SATA, and those prices are volatile as well. There are some derivative related products that the market is questioning. I always fall back on the comparison of just even from a means of exchange of the Bitcoin network compared to MasterCard and Visa. And you think about the value that those networks have from a technology perspective. And I think that's one of the things I feel like people tend to maybe forget or just not appreciate. At the end of the day, the ability to send highly secure transactions from a peer to peer perspective has not ever been disrupted, has not ever been compromised. And when you look at the value of our TradFi payment networks, right, there is still a baseline amount of utility in Bitcoin outside of the scarcity, outside of sort of the censorship resistant and the other fundamentals that, when you come to understand them, you often come to love them. But from just a pure economic value perspective, there is that network that I think will have a life much longer than a typical public company's lifetime. Again, I just don't think it features in a lot of the conversations because we end up being more emotional and more anxious about the near term than we are with some appreciation.
As artificial intelligence continues to dominate investor attention and capital flows, Bitcoin is facing one of its most challenging periods in recent years, raising important questions about the future of digital asset markets. Speaker reveals that one of the most significant trends shaping the current cryptocurrency market may be the reallocation of capital away from Bitcoin and toward artificial intelligence investments. While crypto remained a dominant topic among retail investors, institutional participants, and mainstream market observers over the past several years, the rapid rise of AI has created a powerful new destination for global investment capital. According to the speaker, this shift appears to be driven as much by market enthusiasm and investor psychology as by fundamental analysis. This theory has gained additional attention as Bitcoin has recorded its weakest start to a year since at least 2015, declining by roughly one-third year-to-date, while semiconductor companies benefiting from the AI boom have experienced substantial gains. The speaker notes that major institutional investors may also be adjusting their portfolios ahead of large-scale investment opportunities, including anticipated public offerings such as SpaceX. Despite these challenges, the speaker argues that Bitcoin's long-term investment thesis remains intact and should be evaluated through multiple analytical frameworks. He highlights the traditional four-year halving cycle model, global liquidity trends, the sound money thesis, utility growth, quantitative power law analysis, and capital flow cycles as complementary perspectives for understanding Bitcoin's future trajectory. According to the speaker, Bitcoin's long-term value will ultimately depend on continued improvements in utility, broader adoption, and the ability of the ecosystem to attract capital through products such as ETFs, payment networks, and innovative financial services. He also emphasizes that Bitcoin's greatest untapped opportunity may lie among unbanked and underbanked populations worldwide, whose growing participation could significantly expand the cryptocurrency's global utility and long-term economic value. Let's get back to interview.
We are seeing money flow. One, I think we're seeing money flow out of Bitcoin into AI because it's just this giant suck of capital right now because it feels like it's more emotional than rational. And then at the same time, with things like Stretch and SATA, people are trying to understand, I want a longer term time frame. And a little bit as we were talking earlier, what's been great is those companies have continued to pay out the dividends. They're also not trying to raise the dividends to overly manage the price and say, look, if you have a 3, 5 year, 10 year, horizon and patience, which is less than what you would need to probably hold Bitcoin longer term, right? And that's where they're playing. They're trying to play in that middle space where you get different levels of exposure to Bitcoin. You can use dollars to get it. You don't have to buy spot. The first one is the halving cycle ends, right? This is just really following on the 4-year cycle. Based on the halving, it is a very traditional model that's out there with stock and flow type perspective on where we are. We've continued to see it hold, but show signs of weakness. And I think when you look at all of these lenses, and we'll do more deep dives into them, is like there's real insights that come from each of the different perspectives, even though is not right all the time, and some things are working well and some things aren't working well. But I think that's where there's interesting conversation for us to learn about maybe what's missing, or what is a new lens that needs to be added, or what is a new lesson for us to appreciate. The global liquidity lens, this one is right. This is about the supply of money globally, and where does money flow in times of uncertainty, in times of enthusiasm. And I think we're seeing some of those economics play out. And I think the global liquidity lens provides us some perspective on what happens when money gets printed and sort of new liquidity is interjected into the market. Sound money, right? This is, again, I think one of the old school views of Bitcoin around why it has value, the scarcity, the censorship resistant. People are advocating for Bitcoin of being the most pristine and the hardest asset out there, and that at some point capital will flow to it. There's some things that are favorable indicators within that school of thought and some things that are not. And so I think this is where us teasing out and having a more sort of conversation around these is really important. The utility lens, I think we touched on it earlier in the conversation today, is that for Bitcoin's price to go up, the utility of the ecosystem has to continue to improve. We have to add more value. We have to provide more reasons for that capital to come in. And so I think it's products like Stretch, it's products like SATA, it is ETFs, Stripe allowing for Bitcoin payments. All of those things are going to add layers where we have a foundational layer that helps people be more confident about a store of value.
As Bitcoin navigates a period of heightened volatility, shifting capital flows, and intensifying competition from emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, the broader question facing investors extends beyond short-term price movements. While macroeconomic uncertainty, changing market narratives, and evolving investor preferences have created significant headwinds, many of the foundational characteristics that have historically supported Bitcoin's long-term value proposition remain intact. The asset scarcity, decentralized architecture, censorship resistance, and growing utility continue to provide a framework for long-term adoption and capital formation. At the same time, the expansion of financial products, payment infrastructure, and institutional access points may further strengthen Bitcoin's role within the global financial system. As market participants increasingly evaluate Bitcoin through multiple lenses, including liquidity cycles, utility growth, and monetary policy dynamics, the cryptocurrency's future trajectory is likely to depend not only on investor sentiment, but also on its continued ability to demonstrate real-world economic value and attract sustained global capital flows. Is AI stealing Bitcoin's future, or is this the biggest crypto opportunity in years? Share your opinion in the comments below. Thanks for watching.